This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, and 8 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. And as many of you have found out, you can sign up to speak if you wish, and your written submission, it has the same weight as whether you're speaking or not. And we have received a lot of submissions for this agenda. Before I go into the agenda and we go through the items to see what can be carried on consent or what we're holding, I wanted to start with an update on the release of reports for Planning Committee consideration. So normally, since this is or traditionally, since this is the first Planning Committee meeting of the new year, it's an opportunity for us to kind of lay out what the year is going to look like. So quite briefly, I'm going to do that. But I'm going to start with something that you probably aren't aware of at all, and it is about the release of reports for Planning Committee consideration. Right now, we release the Planning Committee reports to the public 7 days before each meeting. For all zoning amendment reports and official plan amendment reports, however, official plan policy requires that we give 10 days notice to anyone who provided comments or who signed up for the notification. In such cases, we provide a copy of the report to these individuals directly, 10 days before the committee meeting. So for those of you in the audience, if you've been part of any of the planning applications and you signed up to be made aware or to see a report or to be advised of what's happening, you're going to receive those 10 days in advance. What you don't know is that no members of council have been receiving it, including the ward councillor. So that's very much a dichotomy that we want to change. So we're going to ensure that everyone has the same information at the same time starting in February. We're going to use a two-stage approach to posting reports. The zoning amendment and official plan amendment reports will be made available through ottawa.ca on Fridays, 10 days before the scheduled committee meeting. Then on the following Tuesday, 7 days before the meeting, all remaining reports will be added to the published agenda. I've spoken with Councillor Moffat, who chairs the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, and he agrees with this approach. We're going to use the same procedure for any zoning amendment and official plan amendment reports going to the ARAC Committee as well as the Planning Committee. The City will review this new procedure later in 2018 when we go through our governance review, as typical, as part of a governance report going to Council. But this early release of documentation will further advance the City's transparency. So this first meeting of the year is a good opportunity to look ahead at a few items we expect to have before us this year, 2018. The application to demolish the Chateau Laurier garage is on today's agenda, but we do expect a revised development application soon for a new addition to the hotel. And of course, there's going to be public consultation on this important file, but that application will likely be before a Built Heritage Subcommittee that's chaired by Councillor Nussbaum, and then Planning Committee in the spring. We also expect to discuss several community design plans this year, including plans for Barrhaven South and Riverside South. Plans for Cleary and New Orchard areas are also expected, addressing the future development potential for lands near these two upcoming LRT stations. Expanding our scope even wider, we'll look more broadly at Ottawa's future when we consider a report about a planning study underway known as Ottawa Next. Public input is now being gathered for Ottawa Next, which will review the development environment in Ottawa and prepare scenarios envisioning our city's future beyond 2036. The study should be before a Planning Committee in July, and once received, it will be a guiding document used to inform the next version of the official plan. So we'll be getting a head start on the official plan, although in this case, it's kind of a late start because we were supposed to start it before, but as some of you are aware, we do have some appeals and that sort of thing. Staff should provide us, this committee will also consider several reports that could mean changes to many of the guidelines and regulations governing development in our city. Staff should soon provide us with a report with the results of a study on residential fourth density zones, for instance. And I look in the audience and I see that some of you are very much engaged in that process. The first phase of that study should provide clarity around multi-bedroom residences by setting maximum bedroom sizes and better defining dwelling units and bedrooms. We can also expect a report aimed at implementing official plan policies, and new urban design guidelines related to tall buildings, addressing how high-rises should be designed. We should see a report on small-scale industrial uses in commercial zones that will look at allowing limited small-scale manufacturing and food processing in commercial areas, including micro-distilleries, microbreweries, and, of course, the ever-popular popcorn. And a report of the infill 1 and 2 mature neighborhoods, Papa Jacques. And a report on the infill 1 and 2 mature neighborhood bylaws will give us an opportunity to fine-tune the regulations which aim to encourage appropriate development in our oldest neighborhoods, and again, many of you in this room have been engaged in that process. Our city's development review process could also undergo some changes, particularly around the site plan control process and fee structure. The city uses the site plan control process to make sure land development is safe, functional, and designed appropriately, and that it minimizes potential impacts on neighboring properties. We should see a report by summer with recommendations about exactly what changes are proposed. I'd also like to take this opportunity to flag that we'll be hosting a major city planning event in Ottawa this year. And we'll tell you more about that as we get closer. Alain Migalis, who's here, is our lead. Probably many of you know him. He's quite famous for things that he's written, and he does a fine job. We're quite excited about this because it is in May, and Ottawa is going to be the first Canadian city to host the International Making Cities Livable Conference. It's going to be held right here at the Shaw Centre, and participants will discuss the kinds of development that create healthy 10-minute neighborhoods. With our continued focus on transit-oriented development, our upcoming launch of the LRT transit system, and ongoing efforts to make the city more walkable and better for cyclists, Ottawa is an ideal choice to host this conference. I'm certain this will only enhance our reputation as a lively and beautiful city. We have a lot to look forward to this year and a lot of work ahead of us, and it all starts today with our first Planning Committee meeting of 2018. So let's get started on the agenda. So, are there any declarations of interest? Yes, there are.
I, Councillor Rick Shirelli, declare potential deemed indirect pecuniary interest on Planning Committee Agenda 57, Item 2, Bylaw 325, 327, 333 Montreal Road, 334 Montfort Street, and 273 St. Anne Avenue. As my daughter is employed by Shepherds of Good Hope, an organization that is within the same funding bracket as the Salvation Army, the applicant in the mentioned herein, and could see its operations affected by changes associated with this.
Thank you. So noted. Confirmation of minutes from the minutes 56, 12th of December 2017. Any changes, or are they carried? Carried. Item number 1 we're holding. We have several speakers, and we have a presentation from staff, and that's the one that is the official plan and zoning amendments for Rochester Field. The second item is the bylaw for 325, 327, and 333 Montreal Road, 334 Montfort Street, and 273 St. Anne Avenue. That's the one that Councillor Shirelli just declared an interest, a conflict of interest on. We do have speakers, so we will be holding that item. The next item is the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, 1026, 1038, 1040, 1050, and 1054 Hunt Club Road. We have several speakers on that item. We'll be holding that item. So item number 4 is a zoning bylaw amendment, 737 Silver 7 Road and 15 Frank Nybor Place. Councillor Hubley has a motion on that, and we do have Jamie Posen is here from FOTAN. Okay, Jamie, we're going to listen to the motion first, and then you tell me whether or not you still need to speak. Councillor Hubley, you want to put that on the table, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So basically it's limiting the floor space is what we're doing with the motion. My understanding is staff and the applicant both agree to this. So if you want, I can just go to the, therefore be it resolved, the Planning Committee recommend council approve that the addition of a place of worship as a permitted use be limited to 500 square meters, and be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to subsection 34-17 of the Planning Act. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, does anyone have any questions or one on the item or on the motion? So on the motion, is it carried? I should have asked you first. Did you want to speak to the motion? Okay, so if we're prepared to carry this item, do you still need to speak? Okay, thank you, Mr. Posen. So on this item, is it carried? Thank you, everybody. Item number 5 is the front-ending agreement, stormwater management ponds 1 and 2, Leitrim Road storm drainage system, north-south swale, and oversized trunk storm sewers in Leitrim community. I have Pierre Dufresne here from Tartan. Hi, Pierre. Does anyone have any questions? Pierre, do you have a need to speak to us if we're prepared to carry it? Okay, so noted. So is this item carried? Thank you. Item number 6 is agreement with the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority for works in the Upper Pool Creek subwatershed. This is just an agreement on that. I don't see anyone listed to speak. Does anybody on the committee have any questions? Is the item carried? Thank you. Okay, the next one is number 7. It's a zoning bylaw amendment for 168 Daly Avenue in Councillor Flurry's ward. I do have Lloyd Phillips and Ambassador Gita Kalmat here from the Embassy of Estonia. Does anyone have any questions? No? Lloyd, where are you? Oh. Do you want to speak, Lloyd, if we're prepared to carry this item? And the ambassador agrees with you? Thank you very much for coming out today. So is this item carried? Thank you very much. The next item is the official plan amendment in my ward. It's 4497 O'Keefe Court. We have Paul Black is here from Fulton. Does anyone have any questions on this item? Paul, where are you? Do you need to speak if we're prepared to carry this? No, thank you. Okay, so on the item, is it carried? Thank you. So number 9 is the part lot control and road opening applications, part of 300 Goulburn Forest Road. I know that Councillor Tierney has a motion to move on behalf of Councillor Wilkinson. Before we get to that, and I recognize Jack Sterling is here, and you'll speak if need be, Jack? Okay, so are you all comfortable with and I think many of you know what this motion is, with Councillor Tierney introducing it, the motion on behalf of Councillor Wilkinson?
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas the city staff are in the processing application for part of the lot control dealing with the individual lot creation and layout of the K&L Phase 9 subdivision, which has been registered as large blocks, and whereas the plans for the K&L Phase 9 includes provisions for the extension of the slant road to cross the city-owned Renfrew subdivision rail corridor, whereas the staff are proposing to exercise the Annex 1, Section 2.7 of the official plan, where it indicates that the city can require the protection of the future grade separation of any rail corridor and crossing, whereas the ward councillor has lifted delegated authority related to the part of the lot control application in order to have the planning committee provide direction to staff on this matter, whereas the current rail corridor sees 1 train per week per direction, and whereas there's currently no long-term plans or budget established for the construction of grade separation, whereas providing grade separation would require the redesign of the subdivision layout, which is due to the extreme difficulty of the train, would make it almost impossible to service part of the subdivision, as the only road and section would be lost. Therefore, it be resolved that staff be directed to proceed with the part of the lot control application without the protection of the grade separation for Sandland Road, where it crosses the rail corridor, and be further resolved that the delegated authority be returned to staff subject to this direction.
Okay, we'll have to hold it then. So we're going to have to hold it because Councillor Nussbaum has questions of staff on the motion. The staff don't support it. Is that what your question was? Okay. All right, so we're holding item 9. Item number 10 is application to demolish the parking garage, Chateau, Laurier, 1 Rito Street, a property designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have a speaker, Brian Murray, that wants to speak to that, and we have the applicant here too. So we'll be holding item number 10. So if you're here for the Chateau Laurier, you have quite a long wait. Application for demolition and new construction at 485 Maple Lane, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Languor Park Heritage Conservation District. I have no speakers on this, and I understand, Chair Nussbaum, that it carried on consent at your committee. Does anyone have any questions? Is the item carried? Great, thank you. So item number 11 is carried. So next we have item A, which is information previously distributed, with the Committee of Adjustment, Panel 2, Reserve Appointment. If anyone wants to lift this item for discussion, a motion has to go forward. So we're just going to receive that, right? Other business, we do have a motion to include this item as other business. I'm going to have that motion right now, but we'll wait for the other motion, okay, just to get it on the agenda. So the first motion, Vice Chair Tierney, it's on inclusionary zoning, and it's time sensitive.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whereas the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing published proposed regulations on December 18, 2017 related to the inclusionary zoning, seeking public comments by February 1st, 2018, whereas staff have reviewed the proposed regulations with the lens on providing Council with the flexibility in its need to make decisions regarding how to best use the inclusionary zoning provision and make material improvements in Ottawa's affordable housing stock, and have crafted a motion on Council's consideration in that regard. Whereas Council is scheduled to meet on January 31st, 2018, whereas introducing the notice of this matter at today's Planning Committee would allow time for the review, comment, and potential revision prior to the consideration by Council on January 31st. Therefore, it be resolved that the Planning Committee approve the addition of this item to the agenda for consideration by committee at the 23rd of January 2018 meeting pursuant to Section 89.3 of the Procedural Bylaw.
Okay, so to get it on the agenda, which is what that all really said, is that carried? Okay. All right, so we'll go back to the beginning, and I will ask Bruce Finley. Bruce, I saw you here. You're going to give us a presentation. And this item is the official plan and zoning amendments for Rochester Fields. What, did I miss something? Oh. And Alain Migueles is joining him, as is Mr. Tim Mark. The rest of you are all worthy of the misters too, but I just formalized it. Can I what? Okay, so for people who are standing, there are some spaces that have freed up. For those of you down that arm, there are a few chairs in the audience now.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you. This is a presentation on the Rochester Field Official Plan Amendments and Zoning Bylaw. It's a city-initiated amendment. I'm sounding very loud here. Have I got the microphone too close? Good? Okay. The application or the proposed amendments respond to an understanding or a memorandum of understanding between the City of Ottawa and the NCC regarding the alignment of the second stage of the LRT, which will pass through the corridor along the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway. I'm going to give a very brief presentation. There's only about 2 slides involved in this, but then at the end of it, Mr. Mark wants to speak to the committee. Next slide. Okay, so Rochester Fields, an open space linking Richmond Road and the Ottawa River Parkway, it's the John A. Macdonald Parkway. The actual amendment is renaming that parkway in the official plan because we hadn't recognized that name for the parkway in the plan that was adopted by Council back in 2003. The area of land that we're looking at is the land south of the roadway that runs through the parkway, and it's approximately 4 hectares of land. It's the open field and treed area. If I go like this, I should be able to. No, I can't. I was hoping to get a pointer up for you so I could point it out. But it's obviously that large area of green open field north of Richmond Road. The property is informally used as a park by the community and as access to the Dominion transit station. The property is currently zoned in the city's zoning bylaw to reflect the provisions that were carried forward from the former city of Ottawa. And if you have a copy of the report, Annex 4 to that report, a document 4 to that report, actually identifies what is permitted on the land now. It's quite a significant number of different types of land uses. They're all subject to a holding provision, which requires a concept plan to be prepared by the NCC if they wish to develop the land. The city proposed this area to be major open space and traditional Main Street back in 2003. The major open space designation on the land was appealed by the NCC, but the traditional Main Street designation was not. That appeal has never been resolved, and that's part of this memorandum of understanding. So the amendment addresses 2 issues. One, it confirms the alignment of the LRT in the agreement with the NCC, and also it resolves the appeal to the 2003 official plan, because the memorandum of understanding provides that the NCC has some development opportunities on this land. The original memorandum of understanding identified more than 2/3 of this field would be developed, but when it came time to include this land as part of the concept for the linear parkway, the NCC revised its proposal, and when we circulated the draft official plan amendment and zoning, we were looking at the development of 2 parcels on Richmond Road. This plan is a concept of what the park will look like. And the intention is that this park will be developed by the NCC once the second stage of the LRT is completed. So we're looking at post-2023. The proposal before Planning Committee today is to zone the park portion, and I'm going to get to the development portion in a minute, the park portion to open space, an open space zoning. It has the O1, and there'll be an exception provision to replace those X's on the notation when the bylaw is finally adopted. But the O1 zoning only allows a park. The previous O1 zoning that applied to this same land did provide for a lot of other development uses. The final component of it, and the one that I know that is contentious in the community, is the designation of 2 sites adjacent to Richmond Road, which the staff are proposing be in a traditional Main Street zone. It has a holding provision on it, and that holding provision is conditional upon the NCC coming up with concepts for the development of those sites and the meeting some of the criteria, or all of the criteria, that are addressing all of the criteria, I should say, in the special exception provisions of the bylaw. Those exception provisions include greater setbacks from the road and from adjacent properties than required by the existing traditional Main Street zone that applies along Richmond Road. This was intended to enable the existing vegetation along the frontage of the field and at Richmond Road and adjacent to the adjacent residences to the west to be preserved as part of the development proposals in the future. At this time, we've got no idea when that development will occur or what it will be. And it's the provision, that's the reason why we have a holding provision, that we can assess that at that time. The development of these two sites is less than a hectare in area. So if you consider that the overall site's approximately 4 hectares, then it's three quarters park and 1/4 development. That's all I have in terms of the presentation. We're recommending the official plan amendment and also the zoning amendment that's included in the staff report. Now I'll hand it over to Mr. Mark.
Madam Chair, committee will be aware that Bill 139 received royal assent in December. There is a draft regulation that has been circulated that deals with proposed transitional matters. So while the regulation is not in force yet, it provides an indication to us of what the province intends. And under that transitional regulation, these amendments, as staff-initiated amendments, would be subject to the provisions of Bill 139. And so as this is the first report that is likely to be subject to Bill 139, staff thought it worthwhile to bring it to the attention of committee. The test for the official plan amendment will solely be consistency with the provincial policy statement. The test for the zoning amendment will be consistency with the PPS and conformity with the official plan. Should the amendments be appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board, there is a 2-step process. There is a summary first hearing that is based solely on the record that the city sends down to the board. So that's the staff report and the comments that are received. And there's no evidence otherwise called, no other documentation, no live witnesses. There is simply submissions by lawyers. I believe they are proposed to be time limited to 25 minutes for the city, 25 minutes for the appellants, and then the board makes a decision on the tests that I've previously spoken to, and if the board finds that those tests are met, it's over. If the board finds that those tests aren't met, then it's remitted to council. Council considers the board's decision, makes a further decision, and then there's the possibility of that decision being appealed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good? Good. Well, unless you all oppose, I'm going to go right to the delegations, okay? And even if you do, I'm going right to the delegations. Because that's what we usually do, right? It's how we roll around here. So, yeah. Okay, so for the delegations, we have several here. If you haven't been here before, where the gentleman that we're just presenting to us were sitting, there is a chair right at this end over here. It says Public Delegations. When I call your name, you come forward. You have 5 minutes to speak once you start, and there's a button you press, and when your mic is red, that's when you're good to go. So the first speaker is Julia Clarkson. Julia? Julia is followed by Rich Brando. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Could you just...
Is that loud enough?
Yeah, it is. Another thing, it's very sensitive, and sometimes it's really hard to hear.
I'm a quiet talker, too, and I'm nervous. So.
Well, that's okay. Pull it closer to yourself.
Is that good? Okay.
I think so.
So I don't have a slide presentation. I'm just going to speak from my own little written comments here and hopefully meet your 5-minute deadline. I live on Mansfield Avenue. I'm about 2 streets over from the southwest corner of the Rochester Field property. I moved there about 5 years ago. And one of the main reasons I purchased there was to enjoy the green space along the river, the parkway and the field and everything else that goes with it. The fact that the neighborhood was mature and not stuffed with infills and multi-story apartment buildings was a large part of its appeal. I looked for a while before I bought that place. So you can imagine my distress when just a few weeks before I moved in, I became aware of the LRT proposal and the desire of myself and my neighborhood to remain less commercial and more natural was made apparent through its efforts to keep the LRT buried and out of sight. So as mentioned in the city's community development plan for the area, the community treasures its open space along the SJAM, including Rochester Field. Rochester Field is considered a major part of this community. People flock to this area. I have yet to use the path on either side of the parkway without coming across other people enjoying it. The peacefulness derived from the river and its surrounding landscape does not need significant development to be truly appreciated. Any future development of this area should be in line with that culture, not contrary to it. So I'm obviously strongly opposed to development there, but I'm not naive enough to know that it's not going to happen. I just hope it happens in a smart way. The city is historically opposed to having this portion of the field lose its open space status, as we've all heard. The city's former plans are aimed at keeping a green space corridor or a gateway to the river and the pathway. They agreed to develop with the NCC the northeast portion of this property, and I can only assume their reluctance, they had a reason for that, and I hope it was because they recognized the value of green space to our health, physical and mental. Developing the northeast makes more sense to me. There's already multi-rise buildings there, the 7-story CIHI building at 495 Richmond and the recently built 25-story Minto Tower, Upper West, at 485 Richmond, which isn't reflected in any of the diagrams that I've seen in this report. Clearly, neither of these buildings has a problem being near another building because they're very close to each other. So keeping the development there has a lot of benefits, in my view, which I won't bother going into because I think you're all aware of what it means. Keeps it away from the single-family homes on Fraser Street and obviously further away from myself. It also seems more in line with other things the city has written. The design of the city, the maintenance of green space, and the high quality of life will enhance the attractiveness of the city. This is from your official plan. Familiar landscapes and heritage buildings will be maintained despite ongoing change. I don't totally see that here. I suspect that the lanes for CIHI and Upper West locations could be extended to provide access. You guys talk about needing to build a road and traffic lights to get at any development that might be in the northeast. I don't know why, if that wasn't an issue when you made the agreement after the 100-day discussions, I don't know why it's an issue now. The NCC website comments that Rochester Field was to be bundled with Maple Lawn to maintain a heritage theme. The mid-rise building doesn't meet this goal. All of the Maple Lawn buildings are within the R10 zone height of 8 meters, as is the zone for my property and the property south of Rochester Field. So to me, 6 stories is over 3 times the height of that. It's too high. A low-rise property of maybe 4 stories would be preferable. I mentioned in my submission that there's a place going on at 5th Avenue and the driveway called the Queen Elizabeth. It's 3.5 stories. It was limited to that height to blend better with the neighborhood there in the glebe, limit the amount of shading, maximize extra light at night.
We have 1 minute left.
Pardon me? Thank you. Okay, so I don't know why there has to be continuous zone there. Why can't you have a break of open space in a TM zone? You guys mentioned a 12-meter setback. That's nice, but that's a maximum. I don't know what the minimum is. Is that an effective setback? Do you need these buildings? If you rezone there, are you going to start allowing rezoning in other parts of the neighborhood, making it very commercial and less residential? Traffic implications, parking implications. I don't want my street to become a parking lot. You guys mentioned that as a concern in your document 5 comments, but I don't see anything being done to prevent this from happening. I don't know why the corridor has to be in the middle. I don't know why that TM zone has to be on the southwest. Why can't it be pushed to the northeast, or at least to the east, rather? And why can't it be wider?
Julia? Just hang on, because your counselor, Jeff Leeper, has some questions for you. Your time is up, but he's going to ask you some questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and Julia, I really appreciate your coming out today. And I particularly appreciate your pragmatism. The original 100-day deal would have seen something like 2/3 of Rochester Field developed.
Yes.
We're down to 18.5%, yes. And that is in return for the ability to bury our LRT underneath the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway, which obviously has city building benefits in terms of extending our transit. Mm-hmm. So the pragmatism that the community has demonstrated to date has been very gratifying. As I listen to your comments, it sounds like you're not necessarily opposed to any development on Richmond Road, but that there are better configurations for it, that we're sort of getting close to where we need to be, but that there are tweaks that could vastly improve this for the community, for the preservation of the green space. Is that, am I hearing you properly?
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer no development. I don't think that's realistic. I think the development should be pushed further from the homes, not just my own, but particularly the people on Fraser. I think that would be horribly tragic if they went out in their backyard and looked at this. Now, of course, we don't know what it's going to be, and that's part of the problem, but once you open up the ability to put in the 6 stories, other places have pushed that to 18 stories, it would be horrible. And so the further away anything like that is from a person's backyard, the better. And if the other side doesn't have any of that, why aren't you looking at that area?
And that's interesting. A little bit later, I'm hoping to show the concept plan that the NCC approved that shows the buildings on the site, because I think that will make it clear what the community is concerned about. Right. There's a 15-meter gap right now between the 2 proposed traditional Main Street buildings, and the building that is on the southwest corner is really close up against the residential development on Fraser. Mm-hmm. The community is asking, why can't we move that building that's in the southwest corner closer to the buildings on the east to create something contiguous with a wider corridor? Does that sound like the kind of solution?
That would be better. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's so there's room here to improve this proposal.
Absolutely.
Without necessarily opposing all development on the site.
I agree.
Yeah, I appreciate your pragmatism. Thank you very much, Ms. Clarkson.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Rich Brandow. Rich. And following Rich is Gary Luddington. I know that you're here. I saw you. So, Rich?
I sit here? Or I'll just start.
Okay, he has a presentation. Nope. Sir, you have to put your mic on, and you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
So this slide is just to make sure we're all on the same page. The point is that there's nothing inherently required about traditional Main Street on this particular site. For one thing, there's R1 on one side and traditional 2-story on the other side. So it's not like this needs to be zone traditional Main Street, even if it's going to be developed. So the thing is, that's what the plan amendment is for today. That's why we're here. But this is a plan amendment. There's not something inherent in the city's plan that makes this a traditional Main Street site. Again, because of the changes that we have to make in that zoning, the tweaking the setbacks, means that it's not such a great fit in the first place. So back in 2015, there were some consultations that the NCC ran about the waterfront linear park concept that they wanted to build. So who's that guy? So following those consultations, they issued a report that said that they agreed with the 100-day memorandum of understanding and promised that they were going to leave stick to developing only the northeast portion of Rochester Field. It's important to note that this agreement was instrumental in selling the LRT alignment to the local public. So then there were more consultations. And here's some pictures. Now, it's worth noting that these consultations weren't just about Rochester Field. They were the entire length of this, end-to-end waterfront linear park. And that's great if you're trying to, prove out the concept of a waterfront linear park end-to-end. But the fact is, most attendees had little reason to know or care about Rochester Field. But we do. So we'll zoom in on Rochester Field. And this is an overlay of the proposed amendment. And here I'm overlaying Byron Linear Park. And there's a reason for that. Now, Byron Linear Park wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't part of the consultation for the waterfront linear park. And most of the people who attended the consultation wouldn't know Byron Linear Park from Times Square. But it's an important part of how to get traffic into pedestrian traffic into Rochester Field and promote waterfront activities, which is the point of this waterfront park. So it's a collector of all of the community activity that goes into Rochester Field. And it obviously is right next to Rochester Field. So this is probably a familiar picture. This is document 3 in the package that you have. And it's presented by the NCC as, I think, to document the park part of this development, and not so much the development. I couldn't tell you what all those pieces of the drawing are, but it's very pretty. The park itself, however, has some big problems. First, just overlaying the plan amendment. So the northeast corner of this park, in fact, that entire stretch that was originally in the MOU said to be eligible for development, is separated from the rest of the parkway by the trench that is the LRT, where the LRT enters the tunnel again. So that means that basically there's a big fence there. So this doesn't mean this park is completely useless as parkland, but it does mean that it's not what everybody probably imagines that place to have been when they visited it before or looked at it on this diagram. Incidentally, I just want to make this point. Much is being made of the fact that the proposal is using only 20% of the parcel. There was never any expectation that they were going to develop the entire 66% otherwise. So I just wanted to point out that those grassy rectangles there that look so nice in this pretty diagram are actually where the buildings go, and so they separate the park from Byron Linear Park. So it isolates these two important green spaces. So we tried to warn the NCC that this was not the greatest park in the world.
That's your 5 minutes, sir,
Okay.
but I'm sure that Councillor Leeper has a question for you, which is not continue on with your presentation, but he have questions for you. So hang on.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate the scene setting that you've done for us. But what is it, in your view, that should be done with the Rochester Field parcel? And how would this proposal change to meet that?
Okay. I am pretty strongly in favor of sticking with the Memorandum of Understanding, because I would say a whole lot more, but I just want to point this out. The closer that development gets to the transit station, the more forward-looking this whole plan is. And it's just simply wrong to look at it as being just, either it is or isn't transit-oriented development. The closer it is to the train station, the more it serves the ridership. And the planners in this city should be paying attention to that. But I won't continue further with that. I know that the real question here is it okay if, we tweak and get it closer to the Memorandum of Understanding and broaden that green space. And broadening the green space is by far the most important thing here. Okay? But I also realize that this is, I'm just a citizen. This is different levels of government, and it's like a mating ritual between dancing elephants. And citizens' best role here is to throw the confetti.
Well, I think, Rich, one of the key roles that citizens are asking for here is to bring us back to some important principles. Obviously, this design has changed significantly. The plan has changed significantly from when the city struck that 100-day deal with the NCC. The development now takes up far less space on Rochester, but some key elements are missing. Again, councillors have in front of them a package of just some visuals, one of which is the concept plan. I think it's the 5th slide. My assistant Fiona is sitting over there for anyone who wants to pick up a spare copy. It shows 2 buildings that are on the site, and it shows a 15-meter gap between those 2 traditional Main Street buildings. Is that 15-meter gap between mixed residential commercial uses what you would consider to be the green corridor that was at the heart of the deal that was struck between the NCC and the city?
Certainly not. That 15-meter corridor is, a shadowy wind tunnel. It's not going to be an inviting, engaging place for the public and the community who are, on Byron Linear Park to find their way into this waterfront linear park. And I think this is a huge mistake for the NCC. It's not just for the city. The NCC is doing the wrong thing to themselves here. I'm all for them developing, but they need to open that up if they're going to get any activity in that park.
Yeah, I don't want to lead you on too much, but would you agree that we've made this mistake before in the purported public realm space that was built into the Ashcroft Convent that was supposed to become this public path that goes through?
We have another day or 3 for that one to come in.
Chair, what I would like to suggest, though, is that the gap between these 2 traditional Main Street developments is where there's a real risk that no one is going to want to pass through that they're not going to understand that it's public space and not meet the spirit of the green corridor that we all voted for when we approved the 100-day deal. So we've just my explanation for why I'm asking. I think Rich has answered it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Alana or Bruce, do you have any comments? Sorry, Alana or Bruce, do you have any comments on anything that you just heard about proximity to stations or whatever? Thank you, Mr. Brando. Gary, come forward, please. Well, if you don't, it's fine.
No comments.
You good? No comments? Okay. So after Gary is Paul Pearl. Paul, are you here? No, don't come up yet. Gary's first. Thank you. Go ahead, Gary. You know the way we roll here. 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Being an old resident of Westboro, I'm tired of hearing this property being referred to as a field. It's a field because some people don't cut the grass that they're responsible for. But I have a map from the NCC, a copy in front of us, that states this is Park, P-A-R-C, Rochester, P-A-R-K. 1973. NCC map. I tried to find the original because my copy isn't the greatest, and the only thing that's missing from the whole slew of maps that went to Carleton University is this one. I got this from a neighbor. So, if we referred to this property as a park, going way back to prior to 1973, a field has a little bit more, we're out in the country, a farmer's field. This was a park, according to the NCC. And it bothers me that it's been dropped to the status of a field. We're going to have 6 stories. That's like a wall. And this planning department has never, to the best of my knowledge, I'm the chair of the Westboro Community Association, to the best of my knowledge, most development on Richmond Road and in the surrounding area, and the main street, has been higher than 6 stories, even though the zoning bylaw states 4 to 6 stories. Every request that has come along, 9 stories, we've got some that are going to be 25 on Scott Street. So what is to stop a developer coming along when the NCC gets to a point that they're going to have this property developed, and the developer says, I can't do it at 6 stories. it's got to be higher. We're screwed. Excuse my language, but we're screwed. It'll be a higher wall based upon what we see here today. It's interesting that in March 2016, the 3 concepts we got from the NCC are not available any longer on their website, at least when I tried to find them. And those 3 concepts were received by the public at a meeting in March of 2016 and voted on according to the NCC. They got a response from people who submitted comments. And one of those concepts, none of those concepts, had that section along Richmond Road next to Fraser with a building. It was a green site, green pathway into the back to be able to go across the parkway, the Sir John A. Parkway, and get to the Ottawa River. We have a concept on Richmond Road built by Ashcroft where they've got 9-story buildings, and in between the 2 9-story buildings, you should be able to see the convent. Try it. Doesn't work. If you're driving by, even if you're walking by, and I'm not sure why you'd want to walk there because it's always in shadow, you don't see the convent. Not unless you walk between the 2 buildings. So it's an example of what doesn't work. We submitted our comments. I hope the members of the committee read these comments. I'd appreciate it if you go back if you need to. The other interesting part of all of this is we're participating in the city's pre-consultation process. We've signed non-disclosure agreements. We've participated in a huge number. This application was not part of that process. Why not? This is a huge impact on the community. Why couldn't we have been part of that and got maybe somewhere further down the road with what was being proposed? Our request to you as a planning committee and to be approved by council is that we go back, take another look at this, maybe a planning charrette so that we can have the community, have the NCC, and have the city meet and come to an agreement on what works better than what is being proposed. This has been going on. In 2003, the NCC filed their appeal with the Ontario Municipal Board.
Gary, your 5 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Guess what? Just sit there for a minute. Don't turn off your mic. Councillor Leeper has a question for you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Keep that map handy after the meeting. I want to take a closer look at that. It's the first time I've seen the physical copy, I think. What could work better on this site?
In his opinion.
Of course, implied.
Well, it's in my opinion, as chair of the Westboro Community Association, and it's my opinion from what I heard at the public meeting in March of 2016, the idea of building down next to the Keg Manor, there was one of the concepts of the 3 concepts was to go down there and turn the corner actually with building back there, leaving the west portion of this site open green space.
What is the importance of that open green space?
They're trying to give us an alleyway or a view or whatever, a pathway to the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway, the green space in behind, and the river. And I cited the example of Ashcroft where you can't see the convent, and the only reason you get in back there is because there's a pathway. But if you don't go between those 2 buildings on Richmond Road as part of that Ashcroft development, you really don't get to see the convent. So you've got to be able to go between, in this case, we're talking about going between 2 buildings at a minimum of 6 stories, potentially higher, and that'll just cut the whole aspect of people trying to see the river, enjoy the river, which is what the NCC is trying to do.
The connection between our Byron Park, which is receiving renewed attention, and the Sir John A. Macdonald Park, where we had that opportunity to create a real link and bring people between those two parks, would be lost. I'll just quickly make note for councillors and those who have the package, and again, I hope I'll be indulged in putting it up on screen a little bit later. Those three concepts are not publicly available that the NCC consulted on, but you will see concepts 1, 2, and 3. I think it's on the third page of that document that I've handed out to you. Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you.
Hang on, Gary. Councillor Cloutier has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Gary. You were saying that there was extensive consultation, and I've spoken with Councillor Leeper about this. You're saying that there was extensive consultation, relative term, in March 2016, where concepts were studied, and that the concept that we are looking at today in the documentation with Area B and the corridor between was not proposed at that time, was never proposed to the community.
No, there was a meeting hosted by Councillor Leeper in October, I think it was, of 2017, and that is the first time we saw this fourth concept, which came forth basically as a slam dunk. This is what we're going to be doing. So there was no, that was it. Here it is. This is what we're getting. This is what we're applying for.
Okay. Can staff confirm that? Is that correct? That this concept came forth only in October 2017, and that there's been no NCC-led or city-led public consultations on that?
Madam Chair, as far as we know, this has been an evolving process, but we do have a representative from the NCC here who can also answer the question if needed. Lucie, would you like to...
I'm Lucie Bureau, Director of Long Range Planning and Transportation.
Could you speak a little bit louder, please?
Yes, I can. So the NCC did go to public consultations with those three options, and then an option that took the best of the three options was developed and brought to our NCC board, a public board, for approval.
Okay. So...
Merci.
But what I'm hearing is, so no, there has been no NCC-led or city-led public consultations on the option that we're being asked to look at today, and from the First Lady's submission, and from my looking at it, the western portion and the abutment on Fraser Avenue appears to be an issue. So thank you. Those are my questions. Those are my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. So Paul Pearl is next, and then followed by Mark Kwichinski. I hope I didn't crucify your name, but you'll be up after Mr. Pearl. I think the mic is off set. Put it right in the middle of where you're speaking, and turn it on. Press the button so that the light goes on. Press the button. There you go. Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to register my opposition to the above, to the official plan and zoning law amendments. I oppose the proposal to redesignate the land within approximately 100 metres of Richmond Road from major open space to general urban area for the following reasons. 1. Previous consultations on this matter did not include contemplation of mid-rise buildings. All the options presented for consultation suggested that the maximum height of buildings in Rochester Field would be low-rise. This change to mid-rise denigrates the purpose and integrity of the consultation process. Mid-rise developments are inconsistent and incompatible with the intended parkland environment for the area. 2. The development was originally to be located in the northeast corner of the field. The western part of the field was to remain as green space. 3. The Kitchissippi ward already has less green space than most other city wards, and we should not have to give up what little green space we already have. 4. Most importantly, a wall of buildings along Richmond Road, except for a small access corridor, will make the park uninviting for local residents, hiding most of the green space from view. This wall of buildings is totally inconsistent with Council's original vision of a green corridor connecting the Byron Linear Park with the NCC parklands. There are many viable options that have not been fully explored. It makes much more sense to develop the northeast end of Area A, that's the northeast corner of the whole area under consideration, as originally planned, because it is closer to the transitway. It makes station, and within a 500-metre walking distance, that will encourage more people to use transit, which is very much at the heart of Ottawa City's plan. This area is also adjacent to current commercial and high-rise residential developments and would have much less adverse community impact. It is acknowledged that the access costs of this location may be higher, but this would be far outweighed by the benefits achieved in terms of transit ridership, and greatly reduced community disruption. So it is my recommendation that the proposal not be approved and that further studies be undertaken, hopefully in consultation with the local community, to develop a plan that will, 1, recommend land uses that are compatible and consistent with parkland setting, 2, serve the needs of the local community, 3, prohibit any mid-rise or presumably high-rise developments along Richmond Road that will inhibit community access, and 4, limit any development on the site to low-rise structures that are compatible with the adjacent green space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Okay. I see no questions. Thank you for coming out today. Mark Kwaczynski? You can tell me how to really pronounce it when you get here. After Mark is Chris Hercock. Chris, are you here? So you'll be coming up after Mark. Thank you. How do you pronounce your name? Kwaczynski.
I've always thought of changing it to Smith, but to keep it Polish, I'd make it Smithski, for tradition.
Or Smithinski.
I'm pleasantly surprised here. I think someone's pulling my leg. They said there would be a big countdown clock in the corner, which I thought would be a little intimidating.
Well, there kind of is. Yeah, but you're just not looking in the right place for it. So that's okay. Anyways, when you start, you're going to have 5 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you for having me here. I'm a representative of the condo board of 45 Upper West. So people use the term in my backyard very effusively and in a very broad sense. This literally is my backyard. The property backs onto it. People watch me holding my 18-month-old and my 3-year-old as they walk by the park. People, if they so chose to, could literally throw a rock and break my window. So this is literally our backyard. And when I talk to the residents, and by no means do I speak for anyone else, but residents of a few other of the high-rises there, we're all actually extremely, extremely supportive of NCC developing that land. We're very supportive of NCC developing that land. We're very supportive of frankly, any of the concepts. We've actually discussed perhaps collecting a certain pot of money, a small amount, and hoping to donate it to one of the parks, hoping to shape some of the elements. So, my grandfather keeps saying sayings like, "Oh, the good old days." And I'm not old enough to remember the good old days, but every time I look for evidence of what he's talking about, I find that he misremembers more than he knows than he actually remembers accurately. So when I first moved to Westboro, I read a book called Early Days in Westboro Beach, where they talked about the history of this land. And the history of this land is very simple. It is, before the Parkway, before NCC land, it was Richmond Road with linear parks on Rochester Field leading to the waterway. This is not a new crazy development. This is the history of the land. And at the same time, the development was very similar to what's being proposed by the NCC for a very simple reason. There is no other reasonable way to place a road. Other than Rochester Field, all the other land is privately owned. If you wanted to put the development in the northeastern section, you'd have to build a road on Rochester Field anyways, because there is no place to build a road. The development is by Richmond Road because that's where the land is the most expensive, and NCC requires that revenue. So it's either 16% along there or 33% somewhere else. So we see this proposal as a very reasonable, mild return to history. Anyone who lived there thinking that in perpetuity the river would not be accessible and that empty field of land would not be consumed at some point, I think that they may have not done their homework. I also go near that field every single day. I look out on the northeast corner. I look out on Richmond Field every day. And this impression that the community and my council is trying to make of people walking down Bylaw Park and enjoying Richmond Field and playing and frolicking in the grass is a figment of most people's imagination. What you haven't heard here is my volleyball team played its tournament on Richmond Field, because they don't. You don't hear about, oh, my kid's birthday party was there and we had balloons and streamers and beaver tails, because you don't. The portion that NCC wants to develop is simply too close to Rochester Field for most people to feel, too close to Richmond Road for most people to feel safe using it. For lack of a better term, it's dead space. People walk behind there, and then they turn right onto the northeastern corner, and that's where they liked to let their dogs out. That's where they like to play. But now, because of the tick outbreak, people use it only as a path. The grass is too tall. Most people don't feel comfortable with I don't feel comfortable with my 18-month-old running around there. Most people don't let their dogs run. They don't picnic there. On some parts that are cut, they might, there's one picnic table, and they might eat their lunch, but people don't use this field in the way that they're expressing right now. I see it every day. It's a footpath to LRT, and that's about it. If it was converted into parks with benches and cement and manicured trees, people would use it far more. The community would enjoy it far more. As it stands right now, we like the idea of the field, but I see every day, people use it as a thoroughfare, but that's about it. It isn't.
So there, Mark, you didn't have to see it coming down. The countdown just came right at you.
Thank you very much.
Hang on a second, because Councillor Leeper has some questions for you.
Mark, thank you very much for coming out, and thank you very much for expressing a position that I have absolutely heard in the community. We're hearing a lot from people who are very opposed to this particular configuration, but I have heard from a few people who have expressed a different view. We can have a discussion about what open space is useful for at some other time.
You're going to ask a question, right? Okay.
There is, obviously, you're expressing the view of, of Robert Moses in the 1940, that parks are only useful if they're programmed. Obviously, an environmental awareness of what open space is useful for is
rather
coming
than
up.
soliloquies and things like that, can we just get to the question, please?
It would be quicker if I wasn't interrupting this, Madam Chair.
Well, then, I have another way of interrupting you, so question.
So that's an interesting discussion. We'll have that at another time. But I guess my question for you is, would you oppose, is this the perfect plan, or is there room here to balance the different perspectives here? Would you oppose creating a wider corridor from Richmond Road to the river if we could do it? Would you oppose a bigger break on Richmond Road, or do you feel that it needs to be filled in as a positive?
Well, with all due respect, I think you're asking the wrong question. Would I like to have my cake and eat it too? Sure. I'd also, would I love for there to be streamers and balloons there every day for my kids to enjoy? Sure. The question is, what's the trade-off of that? So show me does that wider boulevard mean something else won't be done, or there'll be less lighting, or there'll be, what about, I believe one of the plans mentioned something along the lines of maybe it'll be a hotspot and Wi-Fi for anyone using the waterfront. Does that, will that be gone? So, are you saying, would I want more? Sure, I want more. Where's the less going to come from? And I look at the current proposal, and our concerns are actually not with the proposal. Our concerns are actually with lighting. Like some of the proposals being made of tobogganing hills would require floodlighting. That's what we're concerned about. Okay, is at midnight our windows going to be whether the boulevard's small or narrow? No one cares. I mean, and I mean that respectfully. I know it's important, but that's not what people care about. People care about how often are the garbages going to be picked up? Is it going to smell in 35 degrees? Is the lighting going to be that's what we care about. How is this going to impact people using whatever's there, and will it affect us when, in the middle of the winter time? Nobody uses the park right now. Nobody, because it's covered in a layer of ice. Is this something that's going to be usable in the wintertime? That's what we care about. The width of the boulevard, let NCC and the free market decide that. What can they afford, and where can that money be used for otherwise? But that's, and for what my opinion's worth, that's what we talk about.
Okay, but that conversation is not one that we've undertaken yet, right?
People are undertaking those conversations.
But not with the NCC.
You're incredibly competent at your job. I'm sure you have thought and discussed those already. You wouldn't be this far into step one if you haven't thought of possibilities of step 2 or 3 or 4. So, I mean, you're right, we're not officially in those discussions, but no one's walking into this blind to what the consequence of some of these decisions are.
It would be good to have that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming out. And you're right about the councillor. He's very, very thorough. So there's not a question in my mind that he hasn't done a ton of work on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Hercock, and followed by Julie Pendea. Julie, are you here? You'll be after Chris.
Good morning,
welcome.
Madam Chair. Good morning, Planning Committee.
As you know, you have 5 minutes.
Okay. I will start now then.
Okay.
I'm Chris Hercock. I'm a resident of McKellar Park. I use Rochester Field every day on my walk home from Dominion Station. And I'm here to express a sentiment that has been common to some of the speakers before, as well as many of my neighbors. And that is to express profound disappointment over the potential development of Rochester Field. And also to voice support for Councillor Leeper's position in protecting this space, and ask to have a delay in any proposals leading to its loss so that the communities have a fair chance in seeking Rochester Field's preservation. Rochester Field is a jewel of a park. It connects the Byron Linear Park to the SJAM Linear Park. It's used by dog walkers, cyclists, and pedestrians making their way to and from the Dominion Station and the SJAM Linear Park. It has heritage to it. It was bequeathed to the NCC by the namesake Rochesters, who gave it to the NCC for its preservation, from what I understand. It is a part of what, if I can paraphrase Madame Chair's opening remarks, part of what makes our community so vibrant and livable. It's part of the reason why my family moved to McKellar Park 5 years ago, and it's incredulous and short-sighted that we'd be willing to give up this space so easily. With the arrival of the LRT in 2022-23, Westboro and McKellar Park will face unrelenting pressure for intensification and development in the generations to come. I ask that we be smart about it. The little green space we have must be afforded the highest level of protection. And however fraught this issue is with some of the political dealing until now, I ask you to look upon our history and look upon our planning boondoggles of the past, and to say that we should not be giving up green space so easily. Now, in directing my next comment to the NCC representation, and that is if any reduction in green space is allowed to proceed, it will be another chapter in the NCC how it is not living up to its mandate in land conservation. The few community consultations that have taken place have been more paternalistic lectures on how it's going to be, and our community members have not had the time to understand the loss at stake and to voice our concerns. The bottom line is that this is a jewel of a space, and it should be a non-negotiable between the city and the NCC, a sentiment that has been expressed by some of the residents before me. And I ask that the City of Ottawa and the NCC delay any proposals or propositions that would further see the space developed, and to allow us the chance to convince NCC and City and any proposal leading to the loss of our park space forever. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Councillor Leeper has a question for you.
If City Council were to reject this proposal as needing more work, what would that conversation be? What would you be seeking to get in subsequent consultations? Would you come to the table to say, no, don't put development on Rochester Field? Or would it be more along the lines of trying to seek some compromises around what this proposal looks like?
I think if that conversation was to continue, I think we'd probably back away from the principled and more to the pragmatic as the first speaker, keeping the best. Bottom line is looking to keep the best part of the field, the open part of the field on the western portion, and look towards development where it's less manicured. I'd like to see that conversation just go on so that community members can digest, because the consequences are indelible. So if it takes another year to come to that, then it takes another year.
Thank you. I'll speak to the deadlines that we have a little bit later, but I appreciate that. Thank you, Mark.
Chris. Julie Pandea, and followed by either Dan O'Hagan or Sybil Powell. Are either one of you here? Okay. So, Julie, you have 5 minutes once you get going, too. You have a presentation? Yes?
Now can you hear me? Oh, yes, now you can. Okay, so I will try to be short and eliminate any repeat comments. I'm grateful to my other fellow residents for coming today. I am a 20-year resident of the area. I live on Mansfield Avenue, 2 houses down from the Parkway. I have studied the history, have a full understanding, and expect to retain my memory still for a while. So I have been an active member of the community on our community association, have over the years watched the overall neighborhood, the commercial development, come towards us and bridge the McKellar Park neighborhood with Westboro very nicely in a balanced fashion, with proposals coming from developers, the city support, and the community support to acknowledge that development needs to happen, but in a very responsible manner in keeping with the 2020 plan. My understanding in speaking with some of the elderly residents on our street who are 80 years and plus and would have come if it wasn't inclement weather and doctor's appointments busying their schedules, those that knew the Rochesters when this land was actually donated and parcels were split between Ottawa Hydro, NCC, and the city, was that the intention was this land would not be developed and that it would be available for use for the public. And over the years, I have seen picnickers, people running their kites, people playing soccer, birthday parties held in the field. Over the years, with the lack of maintenance in mowing the lawn, we have not been able to use it. So those who are residents, newer residents to the neighborhood, will observe different patterns of use on this property, for sure. I am in opposition of the existing plan as submitted, specifically the southwest development. The concept plan that we were given access to on the left does not clearly delineate the buildings that would be set. Councillor Leeper kindly gave me an updated copy on the top right. What you are not seeing in the left concept plan is what the zoning is around this neighborhood. And the zoning is R10, and I've blocked off in blue where that that southwest development would be. It would abut directly upon Fraser Avenue. There is an inlet of 3 streets that have long-standing residents who've lived there for years for a reason. They like the access to the parkway, the green space, the openness. And what is going to happen is our visual sight lines will be severely impacted, as well as that corridor nowhere near represents creating access to open green space. In fact, it restricts it. And when I look at the NCC's plans to promote the use of green space, I recognize that the need to get northern access across the parkway is a good objective, but it's not achieved by developing our property. And I say our community property. This has been part of our community. McKellar Park was, this sort of landscape has been in place since the 1950s. We're not opposed to change, radical change in something that's not in keeping with the total surrounding neighborhood is what we are in opposition to. And the NCC's, this one particular parcel of land, it's already in multi-use. It's part of maybe the parkway, but it's also part of our community. And I believe that is lost on the individuals who are putting forward the proposal. And I do also agree that we were not properly consulted in this program. And it is unfortunate that you have a strong representation here of individuals and community members who fought very hard, with the city to ensure that we protected Byron Linear Park and Rochester Field. And, we weren't quite aware that was then contradicted in the Memorandum of Understanding, and we're back here again to protect Rochester Field, but now also to protect ourselves. Those that are on Fraser, they did not buy with the intention that they would have a 6-story development in their backyard. Again, I am fully in support of development, but not to the extent that it will severely impact a long-standing community framework that's been in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming out.
No questions?
Okay. So it says Dan O'Hagan or Sybil Powell from the McKellar Park Community Association. You're both coming up?
Dan O'Hagan and Sybil Powell. She's here to take over when I pass out from nervousness.
Oh, come on, Dan. You've been here before. It hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, but you're pretty intimidating.
You made it through the storm today, too, so.
No.
And between the two of you have 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. We got about 15 minutes of material, not 5, so I'll cut it down on the fly. I'm Dan O'Hagan, and I'm on the board of the
Before you start, I just want to say, I don't see that you have submitted anything in writing yet. So
no, I haven't, but I'll give this to the clerk.
Perfect. If you have 15 pages, submit that. There's lots of time between now and council.
Perfect.
Okay? Thank you.
Okay.
Go now you're 5 minutes.
Okay. I'm Dan O'Hagan, and with me is Sybil Powell, who's the president. I'm also on the board of the McKellar Park Community Association. Our catchment area and our area of interest goes right up to Fraser, which is right beside the Rochester Field, and lots of our members, our constituents up and along Byron and Richmond use the Rochester Field all the time, so our members are deeply affected by what happens here. I want to say that we have no problem with the redesignation of about 80% of Rochester Field as open space. Keeping 80% of the field as park
is what virtually everybody wants, and I think you've heard that today. Not from everybody, but from most people. So we're grateful for that. Our problem is with the 20%, where it comes from and what's on it. And with that, we have a lot of problems. Our strong preference, and virtually everybody in the community agrees with this, would be that this was also designated as park or open space. As you know, this was in effect the position of the city as well until the 100-day agreement. The NCC didn't agree, used the 100-day agreement, in our view, to extract some commitments from the city, and that brings us to this room today. As the documentation for this meeting notes from the staff, the agreement between the city and the settlement of the outstanding appeal of the city's official plan requires the city to permit some development on Rochester Field. That's from the staff report. So by the agreement, the NCC has a right to ask for some rezoning, and the city has an obligation to give it some rezoning if it wishes to ask for it. But as Councillor Leeper has pointed out, the city is not obligated to approve zoning changes that are significantly different in letter and spirit from the arrangement worked out as a result of the agreement. And from our point of view as a community association, even more so, it's not obligated to approve something that is widely seen in the community as not having been subject to real consultation. I'd like to go back with you just for a few minutes or a few seconds, a couple of minutes, to the meeting. Gary Ludington referred to it. Councillor Leeper has referred to it. It was Councillor Leeper's meeting, by the way, in October of 2017. It was not the NCC's meeting. The NCC had a series of consultations, put out 3 concepts. You've seen the 3 concepts, or Councillor Leeper has them for you to see. In October of 2017, Councillor Leeper held a meeting for the community, and the NCC presented a concept for Rochester Field that we had never seen before and on which we had not been consulted. That was the first thing. That was the first shock at that meeting when people came in. There were 60, 70 people. Pretty well everybody left angry and shaking their heads. But it wasn't the only thing that I remember from that meeting. The first was that we hadn't seen this before and we hadn't had an opportunity to consult. It was also made clear at the meeting that the MCC has no immediate use for this property that it wants redeveloped as traditional Main Street. It doesn't know when it's going to activate this designation. It doesn't know what's going to go on it. This was all very clearly made at the presentation by the NCC person. And finally, the thing that has stuck in my mind the most since that meeting is that the person from the NCC made very clear that the NCC wants this traditional Main Street designation because it needs the money. In other words, the NCC's intention with respect to this property is driven by financial considerations and not by design considerations. If you go back to the 1950s when the NCC was set up, it was supposed to be an alternative to development decisions made by the profit motive. It was supposed to make the city a place that's attractive for tourists, visitors, and people in Ottawa to come to. This isn't it, frankly. I think organizations, like people, have their good days and they have their bad days. This particular proposal from the NCC is not the NCC on one of its good days. I think this committee would do itself, the city, the community, and the NCC a favor by saying, this is not really acceptable. You know it's not acceptable. It's not driven by the highest standards of the NCC historically. Take it back, do a real consultation with the community, and bring it back when there's been real consultation. Thank you.
Councillor Leeper has a question for you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sybil and Dan. Again, the same question. If Council were to reject this proposal in order to send it back for some further consultation, what do you think the flavor of that consultation would be? What would you like to talk more with the NCC and the city about?
Okay. I wouldn't like to see this come out of it. As I say, this is not the NCC on one of its better days. But As I get older, I come to the conclusion that what I want is democratic process. I'm prepared to put up with just about anything if I know that the people involved have had their chance to talk about it, if there's been consultation, discussion, real consultation, and some kind of input from the people who are affected. This isn't it. This hasn't been done. What would I like to see at the end? I'd like to see a real process. I'd like to see real consultation. Gary referred to as a planning charrette. Not even sure what a planning charrette is, but it sounds like a good idea to me. There hasn't been any of that for this. And I don't think the NCC would be all that upset if you told them, take it back, work on it, consult with the community, and come back with something that's better.
But Dan, wouldn't that conversation just turn into a don't develop Rochester Field?
See, I don't know. I don't know about that. You've had a number of people here, and they've all said, take it back and rethink it. Rethink what? What comes out at the end of the rethink? I think you've got to listen to your people, the constituents in your ward, and they're all saying, take this back and rethink it. Well, give us a chance to rethink it. I don't know what will come out of that rethink process. It might be this. It might be something else. It might be all of Rochester Field is developed. It might be none of Rochester Field is developed. But I know that we haven't had a chance to talk with the NCC. The NCC are the only people that have any running room on this. You are obligated to give the NCC something by the 100-day agreement. They don't have to ask for it. So send it back and say, is this really what you want?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out today.
Okay.
David Bosco? Oh, what? Oh, just hang on a second. Hang on. Who is it? You, Jean? You, Riley? So neither of you do? Okay. Thank you very much for coming out. David Bosco, and followed by Diana Partridge. Diana, are you here? Okay. So David, you have 5 minutes. While we're getting ready, Dan, I just want to remind you to make sure that we get a full copy of your presentation. Okay? Thank you.
I have a problem. What my presentation says is not what I spoke.
Well, that's your problem. So I would think very carefully before I handed those documents over, sir. Mr. Bosco, go ahead, please. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Thanks very much. So I'm one of these people who is, again, very close to the park. This is actually my front yard. And that's what it looks like right now. I took that a couple of days ago. You can see the river through the trees. You can see the trees in the summer. You can't see the river, but it's there, and you know it's there. And this is the only area along Richmond Road where this is the case. So I would like to see no development, obviously, and that's probably a pretty naive assumption on my part. Kitchissippi needs parks. It's been identified as a deficit, not necessarily green space, but parks. Now, another member mentioned that the property was sold to the NCC on the understanding that there would be access to the river and to the parkland. I don't have that documentation, but I believe that to be the case. It's been common knowledge in the neighborhood for a long time. But my beef with this today is maybe getting a little into the weeds, and I'm going to go back to the document that you have and look at the amendment to the master plan, which nobody has really talked about yet, and compare that to the rezoning. So these get a little washed out, but there's the amendment to the master plan. So you can see Fraser just to the to the west of this parcel. This is what is being proposed to be changed from green space, open space, to general urban. Here are the zoning changes. So the 2 sector area Bs are going to be changed from the current open designation to TM, according to the proposal. And so we look at those two at the same time. So the proposed amendment to the official plan is on the left and the zoning's on the right. I've just put the amendment to the official plan now, and I've put it on top of the zoning. So there's a section right there that I want some answers about. Why is that being changed in the official plan if it's not being rezoned? That should be open space as far as I'm concerned. I don't want these things to be rezoned, but if they are, at least get your act together and get this together. And maybe I'm naive and there are reasons why you have made these changes to the official plan, and I'd like to hear what those are. So, my question then is, what's that difference? I want to make sure that whatever happens here, there is some kind of access from Richmond Road, from Byron Languor Park, to the rest of Rochester Field and to the river. And if you change the official plan and make that general urban, there's no guarantee of that whatsoever. Now we take the concept plan for Rochester Field and we take those together. I put the proposed amendment on top of the concept that we have. We see there's no consistency there either. The NCC has development in the areas that are going to be rezoned. So to me, all of this is premature. We have no site plan. We have no idea what's going to go in that area. Let's dial it back and come back at this when there's a much more definite plan about all of it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. I know that you have a question of staff.
I do. I'll just ask one really quick question of David, if I may, and then I'll ask staff. I think the concern that you have, just to get some clarity between the difference in the official plan designation and the zoning, is that there is a strip of land that you're worried could eventually be developed according to that official plan designation, regardless of what the zoning is?
Yeah. Well, there's two different things. So there's an area along Fraser there that is parkland according to the zoning and is going to be general urban according to the official plan. The access from the back, from the northern part of Rochester Field to Richmond Road is also going to be part of the general urban. There is no indication in the official plan that there is an access way through that, whereas it's common understanding in the community that that was always the intention of the original owners when they deeded the land to the NCC.
Okay. And maybe I could ask staff, can you address this question of the likelihood of that undesignated or unzoned area eventually becoming developed? How do we have those guarantees that the rest of it is going to remain parkland?
Okay, so I want to go back. First of all, the zoning bylaw is rezoning all of the land, including part of what we're proposing to designate general urban as open space. and is removing the potential development rights on that land that currently exist. The fact that we designated that block general urban is more a practical thing than anything. You cannot see that on our schedule of the official plan in anything smaller than that size.
Okay.
So it recognises that there is part of this site is going to be general urban. The zoning applies all the way to Richmond Road, and the zoning, the open space zoning, is permitted in both the major open space designation and in the general urban designation. Most of our parks in Ottawa you will not see on our official plan, but they're zoned to protect them as parks. So this was just simply a technical way around some awkward problems with the scale of our official plan maps and still protecting the corridor and the zoning. The TM zone that applies to the two parcels fronting on Richmond Road can only be changed through a zoning amendment, which would bring the NCC back to the city if they propose to change the configuration of those zones.
I think that meets with my understanding of why there's that discrepancy there. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Madam Chair, if I can also add, the delegation also raised the issue of the lands that are closer to Fraser. Through the consultation that Councillor Lieber held back in October, we certainly heard from the people that appeared and gave us feedback. And we went back and made some changes. And one of the changes I'd like to highlight is that we imposed a 12-meter setback from the west property line, which wasn't there before, in order to preserve the row of trees that exist. And we also imposed setbacks from the traditional Main Street in order to preserve the row of trees that exist. So these are two things, back to Bruce's point, that if nothing is done today, will not exist as requirements. Again, I mean, what's in front of committee today is taking away development rights from the NCC and bringing in open space protection for 75% of these lands. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Right, thank you very much, Mr. Bosco. Diana Partridge. And that's all the speakers that have signed up once Diana speaks. So you can sit right there. Do you have a presentation too?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Very short. How do I make it? Like that? Okay, is it on? Yes. Hi. I'm here as a resident I live on Byron Road. We look across the street at Rochester Field. But I'm also here, I'm going to show you pictures in a second. I'm also here as a mother and a grandmother. I want to protect this space for our, where's there? So, this is actually a view of Rochester Field from the north side of Byron. You can see the Languor Park. You can see, these are actually some students from the school. They come down to have their lunch, sitting on the park bench, and they're looking across, and they're sitting there because this is a peaceful place. People like to have a green space, in spite of somebody's comment, and we see that frequently. I want to bring this to a level of the human, because we've been looking at aerial views and plans, and this is really what it's like. Here is Rochester Field. This is your gateway to the river. Oh, how do I make it go again? Can I change? Oh, tap that. Okay, so this is the only place on the Ottawa River that you can, on Richmond Road, you can see the Ottawa River, and this is such a unique opportunity. This is the Languor Park. We took these pictures 2 days ago. Look at all the people on it. And you can see right through to the river. And look at the Gatineau Hills there. Let's not lose this. This is a broad avenue right now. And if we restrict it to a narrow space, more people are walking down the Languor Park all day, even in the evening, and they can see the river. Please, please, don't restrict this view. This is such a chance for us, for our grandchildren. All right, so now I try to show you from a ground level what it might look like if buildings go in. So this is Richmond Road. Here are all the cars, vehicles. On the right-hand side of this, there's the Keg Manor, and you can just see the edge of the trees that are on Fraser. Here are two buildings. I mean, they're not real buildings, but try to put something in to show you how it would block that potential. And if you're walking on the Languor Park and you see this little corridor, are you going to go, oh yeah, let's just run right down there to the river? No, you know, anyway, I will not get too emotional about this. So my conclusion is, let's take this back. Let's have a better look. I think we've been rushed too much. This is a heritage place. I'd like to see more consultation. So I'm not totally opposed to development, but I think we need to consider it more. And I'm here. I'll probably be looking up at the grass rather than down at the grass by the time this happens. But I want to protect this for my grandchildren.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana. Okay. Thanks for coming out today.
No questions?
Councillor Ripa, do you want to...
Sure.
I'm not sure what you're going to do, but I think, did you want to... Are you just going to sit here? Yeah.
I'll just sit here, yeah.
Okay.
So those are the end of the delegations, I assume, and I've asked the chair for some indulgence. Each of the councillors, you've received just a quick stapled deck. I just want to take you through in, I think, 2.5 minutes what you're looking at, because a number of these documents are not available publicly, and I think that they'll add some urgency to the question that we are asking today. Yep. Just for the sake of the gallery, it'd be great if it's on screen. There's a J. Leaper PC presentation, I think. It's a PDF in the bingo. Fantastic. Okay. Thanks, Alain. Just a quick perspective on what I think we're making a decision on today. I've highlighted first the language that is in the 100-day MOU. You all voted in favor of this. This was language that came to FEDCO and then it went to City Council. And I think that the important part of it is that we were allowing a fairly significant development on the site, but we wanted to preserve the west-hand side. That's what we voted on when the 100-day deal came. On the next slide, these were the materials that were made publicly available in the wake of the 100-day deal. We had a number of open houses around the city. I believe I took this particular document from something that was attached to the council agenda item. So again, this was part of our thinking when we approved the 100-day deal. And what it talks about is that green corridor through Rochester Field to be redesignated to park space and enhanced. That green corridor, I think, is an important part of what we're talking about today. I would ask just move on to the next slide. In August of 2015, the city began a process to implement the letter and spirit of the 100-day deal as written. So we had a process. I put it on my blog. It began as a consultation to designate the 2/3 of Rochester Field as a developable area. And it's interesting to note that at this point, despite the fact that I went through all my usual mechanisms of making this publicly available, available, the outcry was relatively minimal. Certainly, there are a lot of people in the ward who would like to ensure that there is no development on Rochester Field whatsoever. But again, we had a transparent process in which we agreed to the 100-day deal. We began this process, I made it public, not a huge outcry, certainly nothing compared to what we're getting today, and it's my contention that that's because this would have preserved that green corridor that we voted for and that we showed people. Moving on to the next slide. And I think it is important that you have this document in front of you. It's no longer available from the NCC. I'm not sure why this isn't a publicly available document or why it's not part of the process that we're talking about today. The NCC put a pause on that official plan amendment that began in August 2015. Remember that the city is going to pay the NCC $30 million to help it build its new linear park. The NCC went away and began to consult on what that park should look like. There were 2 very well-attended open houses, and they showed people these 3 concepts. The numbers below indicate how many people responded to the concepts positively, neutrally, or negatively. My view is that option number 3, which shows that denser development down near Richmond Road, raised, certainly the greatest level of opposition, the greatest difference between agree and disagree. Obviously, none of the 3 really were a lot of enthusiastic buy-in. Again, we have to recognize that many in the community would prefer there be no development at all. And then if we go to the next slide. This was finally the proposal that came to the NCC's board. It is a hybrid of the other options. This diagram is not available publicly. It was shown to the NCC board. I was able to watch the YouTube live cast of that NCC board meeting, do a quick screen grab in order to be able to get this. And what it shows is, I think, much better than the material that was put in your packages. What is the impact of putting that traditional Main Street development along Richmond Road? We've gone from that green corridor that we voted for and that was promised to residents in the 100-day deal to a 15-meter gap between traditional Main Street developments there that I don't think anybody can really say is a green corridor. And in fact, many of us have notions of our head of what that might look like according to some of the worst examples in the city of how we've tried to achieve that public realm experience in private development. And then, of course, you see, I just wanted to make sure that you do have that schedule in front of you on the next slide of what the zoning is. You see that narrow corridor. And a lot of us are wondering, that building that is on the southwest corner, could that get tucked in behind Maple Lawn? Could it be made a little bit smaller and made contiguous with the developable portion, Area B, that is to the east, to provide a much wider green corridor to the west of the site that would be uninterrupted park access? We have a lot of things that we feel could be done with this particular configuration that would give the community that green corridor that we voted for and that was promised to the community in the 100-day deal. I'm not going to get too deep into everything that was delved into this morning. My request of you is, you have heard the community's concern. You've heard their pragmatism. I do have a couple of quick questions from staff, though. Staff, one of the things that was offered to the community was a green corridor. How does a 15-meter asphalt passageway between 6-story mixed-use buildings qualify as a green corridor?
Madam Chair, in our minds, 15 meters is the equivalent of one of the very nice and leafy streets of Westboro. It's about twice the width of the stairs that join York Street to Mackenzie Avenue between Revenue Canada and the U.S. Embassy. It is a very, very different experience than some of the passageways, for instance, that you find behind the Bylaw Market courtyards, which really are an intimate expression of public access. We're talking about the width of a street, except here, nothing requires it to be asphalted, and it's fully pedestrianized.
We'll have to disagree on that. This is only slightly larger than the passageways at Q West, for example, that are supposed to lead to the convent site, which are not an inviting pedestrian cycling connection at all. In fact, they keep people away. The opportunity, I think you've heard from the community, is to rethink this configuration with some tweaks to provide for an uninterrupted green park connection between Richmond Road, between Byron Languor Park, and the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway. One of the things that I think needs to be asked is, this is not the city's proposal. We've brought forward the rezoning, but the actual design, is this something the city is a proponent of? Did we design it, or are we putting forward something that the NCC is seeking?
Madam Chair, that's a really good question. The city is not the proponent of this design. What we have done is we have placed a holding on the zoning so that further discussions can be held, and that further discussion can lead to perhaps reconfigurations that might better meet the aspirations of all the parties. It is an NCC proposal, which they developed on the basis of the information they received from their exercise that they ran through us in terms of setting up what they consider to be their requirements under the terms of the 100-day agreement. But nothing in what is in front of committee today would preclude passages from being configured in a different shape, certainly not passages from being green. That was one of our questions. The footprint of buildings can move within the Area B that we've outlined, but even to one of the delegations questions, the application of the general urban area to a slightly larger square would allow for a manipulation of footprints that might reflect, perhaps when the day comes for an actual proposal, further discussion and further design attention.
When the NCC consulted on its three options that are in the package, it came away with the in its what we heard document with the priorities that it heard from the community, and the community's priorities were pedestrian access and experience, protecting and maximizing green space, user safety, and view of the river. I'm guessing it is not the city's assertion that this is the best way or the only way to achieve those objectives. Rather, it is the NCC that is saying this is how we'd like to accomplish those.
Madam Chair, there is never an only way, as we all know, but in terms of what we saw, the part of the input that we got, that we received at our office from community representatives, was that the presence of the meadow that exists in what previously was supposed to be developed was also of value. We also saw a proposal that was attempting to group the right elements in the right place. So it made some sense to us, and that's why we're recommending it, to have the green space as part of the continuation or the continuum of the corridor that's along the river, while maintaining that accessibility, a green corridor to reach it. At the same time, as we heard from one of the delegations, developing in behind might introduce a building footprint and a building profile that could affect the backdrop of Maple Lawn. It would develop on very sensitive environmental lands that some people have identified as valuable, and which the NCC now in their design is proposing to maintain. So the reason why we felt comfortable recommending this is the placement of the elements made some sense in regard to what we agreed under the 100-day agreement, and it augments the amount of green space that's actually being maintained while not eliminating the chance for further discussion on refined design when the day comes. Hence the holding zone.
But this is a very, I don't know if I can go so far as to say shrink-wrapped zoning, but you have some very specific setbacks on two parcels, a zoning line that defines the width of the corridor between those two buildings. It's going to be tough to reconfigure this through a site plan process, for instance, without having to come back to council for rezoning if some of the elements are changed around. Can I ask you just to put that slide, the NCC's hybrid concept proposal on screen? Thank you very much. And really, if we want to talk about sort of compromises that we can make, one of the tweaks would be to take that building that's in the southwest corner and somehow add that height or density into the building that runs along Maple Lawn north-south. I'm going to have to guess that staff wouldn't oppose such a change, but that such a change would be difficult to achieve given that it would have to come back for rezoning.
Madam Chair, that's correct. Because there is a holding zone, nothing can proceed as of right without having a return engagement in front of your committee. So absolutely, if the day comes when a different solution is arrived at and there is a redistribution of whatever footprint, there needs to be a lifting of the holding zone. It's a process.
That process is here.
Right. So, but it does have to come back. I'm trying to understand the need to shrink wrap this zoning in this particular configuration today.
I mean, we can call it shrink wrap, but we can also say that it's constricting the development rights that the NCC will now enjoy as opposed to what they have today. So basically, it shrinks what the NCC can do on this land from 100% of the site to those two footprints. And those two footprints still fit within the general urban envelope, so there's still room for moving things around if need be.
But that room is through an additional zoning process.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Yeah. What is the rush? We know that this building, there are no plans on the part of the NCC to actually develop this. Their attention is going to be taken up with building their park through the course of the next 6 years.
We don't know that, so let's not hypothesize. And
well, there is no
I think
development
at the beginning
proposal.
we were talking to timing and that sort of thing. I think Mr. Mark had a legal comment. Maybe do you want me to have him? Is he still here? Yeah, Mr. Mark, did you want, just sorry to interrupt, but there are other people that want to talk as well.
I'll put myself back on the list.
Well, no, I would like you to finish your questions, because then I'm sure you're going to want to wrap up.
Sure.
Okay, so how close are you on the questions?
Almost done.
Okay, so Mr. Mark, do you want to repeat the reason that you came forward at the beginning of this item?
Madam Chair, I noted after Mr. Finley's presentation that this particular matter, as it is city initiated, comes under Bill 139, and as so, if it were appealed, there are limited rights or limited ability to address matters, limited to consistency and conformity with the official plan, and that the new process under Bill 139 would apply.
Okay, and just for another point of clarification, so I'm not going to be subjective. I don't want to box anybody into a corner here, but the holding symbol that you are attaching to this recommendation that's coming forward, what confidence level does it give you that there's another ability for the conversation on the location and the zoning before us today to come forward, just so that everyone is clear on that?
Well, quite simply, Madam
And when
Chair.
does that happen? What triggers that to happen?
Sure. I mean, quite simply is that nothing can proceed without returning in front of your committee, so that we would not be looking at anyone pulling permit and proceeding with a site plan control application that is not in front of you. And that, of course, presupposes a process. And the NCC has committed to us and to the public, I think, to undertake such a process.
And so, as we know, Councillor Leeper would have the right to lift delegated authority on site plan as well, if need be. But the bottom line is that this proposal today takes us to the next stage, and then at the end of that process, it still comes back here. You agree? Okay.
And Madam Chair, if I may, there is a timing issue associated with LRT works, the construction of which is perhaps 12 or 15 months away. The city, through its LRT program, will be delivering significant amounts into the park space. And part of the agreement with the NCC as well is to provide them with certainty of the developable potential that flows from the agreement.
Okay, thank you. So finish your questions, please. Or you don't, no more questions?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Councillor Nussbaum. Anyone else have questions? Councillor Blake? Councillor Nussbaum.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions of staff. If we look at that hybrid rendition that Councillor Leeper got from the presentation at the NCC board. And I'm just sort of visually overlaying it with document 2 of the staff report. And it looks as if the intention of the hybrid version is to have that building on the southwest side be relatively shallow. It's not going very deep north onto that west side. So if I look at that and compare it to document 2, it looks like the traditional Main Street zoning that staff are recommending for that site is significantly deeper than what's on that slide. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to that.
Yeah, that is correct. After the consultation that we had, or the public meeting that the councillor organised, there was quite a bit of feedback, and through that feedback there was an expression that what people were looking for is the protection of a lot of the trees along the western boundary of the property, and also the trees along the frontage to Richmond Road. We had our natural systems people go out and have a look at the site. They looked at the trees, and they recommended that the setback from those trees, if you wish to preserve them, should be about 12 metres from the property line. So we include...
I don't think that's... I don't think you're interpreting my question.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I am. Because we're going to change, we're changing the zoning to allow the buildings to locate further away from the property, we extended the smaller property on the left to the back by 12.5 metres. So that's why you'll see on the image in the zoning amendment, the property on the left-hand side, the western side, is slightly deeper than the one shown in the original NCC concept. It's deliberately enlarged to increase the capacity to protect the trees on the property.
So if you look again at that rendition, the hybrid rendition, there was already a fairly significant western green space around.
That is a sketch, and that is nowhere near where the trees are actually on the property. If we could pull up one of the aerial photographs, you'll see that there's quite a wide swath of trees along the western boundary. You can see it in that map.
Okay, so if I'm to understand, so what city staff said is, because we want to have a 12-meter setback on that western side, we're going to maintain the total GFA that you're permitted to build on that site by extending the buildable space further north. Is that fair?
It's providing a deeper footprint. There's no restrictions on GFA other than the height limit on the building.
Madam Chair, what we hear as well from the delegations today is a wish to, when the day comes to design this, to look at what nature, location, and size of corridor might exist between Richmond and the bulk of the park. In what's in front of committee today, nothing precludes a change in those footprints. I mean, a schedule can be changed, and it's part of the zoning process that would be triggered anyways because we have a holding zone. So what we're simply doing is providing the NCC with a theoretical development potential subject to discussing in further detail. That's why we have the holding zone, and that's why we have the setbacks to protect the trees from both property lines where they were deemed important.
Okay, so let me turn to the setbacks then at this stage. Under document 2 on page 18 of the staff report, can you just explain, because I was a bit confused under 5B, why those setbacks that were just mentioned, the front onto Richmond Road and the interior side yard on the western side, why are they set as maximum as opposed to minimum setbacks? So when I read a maximum interior side yard setback adjacent to a residential zone of 12 meters, I can imagine that if that's what the maximum is, then there's some minimum that's less than 12.
Madam Chair, we also want to make sure that we control the height of the building. So we're establishing a developable area where there's a volume that needs to be calculated. So basically you establish these sizes and it produces what will be able to be developed.
Sorry, and maybe Mr. Mark can comment. If I have language that says a maximum side yard setback of 12 meter, is there anything stopping a future proponent of proposing a 2-meter side yard setback and arguing that that's within the zoning schedule?
Madam Chair, I want to be certain I understood the question, because what I heard is if a maximum side yard setback of 12 meters was proposed, could someone build to 2 meters? And the answer to that would be yes, because it's a maximum and they're building to less than that.
So is that an error? I mean, if it's an error, it's easy to fix. You could call it minimum, but I'm just wondering if that was a mistake, in which case I think it needs to be fixed.
No, it was intentional. The traditional Main Street designation as it stands, traditional Main Street zoning as it stands today has, I think it's a 1 meter setback from the road. The intention was to provide an opportunity to move those buildings further back. Also, as part of the design of that, we have provisions in the zoning that actually look at the landscaping and the protection of trees. So this provides them the opportunity to go back further in order to protect the trees. At this point in time, we do not know what is proposed on these sites. So we're providing that flexibility. If we just made it a straight traditional Main Street zoning, they would have to remove those trees to put the buildings in.
Okay, I
So
must not be communicating well this morning. There is a line on page 18 under 5B. In column 5, provisions add the following: a maximum interior side yard setback adjacent to a residential zone of 12 meters. A maximum side yard setback.
That's right.
Mr. McGillis said that the whole purpose of the side yard setback was to maintain the row of trees and have a buffer between the residential homes on Fraser, is it, and this building. But Mr. Mark has told us if you call it a maximum side yard setback, nothing stops a future proponent from building it a meter away from the side yard.
Site plan does.
So I think I understand the question better, Madam Chair. I think the maximum is there also to account for the fact that the trees are not all in a line. So when, again, I mean, we have a holding zone. When we come to an actual proposal, we'll be able to, I mean, it's part of the staff report that we want to maintain those trees. They're just not all in a line. They're, helter-skelter. So where there is an opportunity to come closer, that provision would allow it. When it's a matter of protecting the tree, well, at the point of lifting the holding zone, we'll be able to have that discussion and make sure that the footprint protects the trees. That's what it's meant to do. I mean, as Mr. Finley indicated, if it were a regular traditional Main Street, you would be looking at little or no side yard setback.
So I entered into this questioning very sympathetic to the staff recommendation, but I have to tell you that answer actually doesn't satisfy. I mean, if you're going to argue to the residents that there is an intention to put a 12-meter side yard setback on that site, then calling it a maximum side yard setback and admitting that there could be a 0-meter side yard setback subject to whatever happens under a holding is not particularly reassuring to the people who I think you're intending to tell, look, we won't be putting anything next to that site. We're going to maintain a 12-meter setback, but that's not what the zoning says. So if your intention is to keep that, I don't think writing the word maximum achieves that intention.
So Mr. Smith is here. The big guns are up now.
Madam Chair, the councillor is correct, as has been confirmed by Mr. Mark. It does say maximum. The intention clearly was, as Mr. Megley's indicated, was to establish a setback for those properties fronting onto Fraser that would in fact ensure the retention of that mature vegetation. So we'll definitely take that, and we'll have to make an adjustment to the zoning just to clarify that in fact it's not going to have a situation where we create a condition that allows somebody now to come in and push a setback that's inconsistent with the objective. The holding provisions do speak to maximizing the retention of the trees, and we'll clean that one up by way of a motion that we'll have brought forward to council.
Okay, thank you. Let me turn to, I think, my final comment or question, which is what I heard from some of the public delegates was a concern about the width of the entrance from Richmond Road, and a concern that could be canyon-like. I'm wondering if the fact that in our official plan we talk certainly on traditional main streets of maintaining a 45-degree angle between the middle of a street and the top of the adjacent buildings. Is it staff's view that you would want, although this pathway won't be a traditional main street and then technically wouldn't be subject to those guidelines, would you say that in that initial entrance from Richmond Road, you would want to approach that from a site plan point of view with a similar intention of having that 45-degree angle from the middle of the path or the corridor to adjacent building heights?
That could be a possibility, Madam Chair.
Okay, because again, when you look at the rendition that was put up, and the reason why I focused earlier on the depth of that first building is, for the most part, this pathway is much wider than 15 meters, because after you get past the first building, according to the rendition, it opens up. You've got a plaza, a fountain, perennial gardens, and you can imagine that being actually a very attractive linear park. But I am sensitive a little bit to that notion that if you're going up 6 stories on either side of 15 meters with no side yard setback on the interior side, on the path side, that I can understand why there could be a risk that people would worry about the possibility of more of a canyon and less of an invitation into, again, I think what could be a very attractive linear park. So how could staff reassure me and members of the public that there will be ways of ensuring that that's an open access way?
Mr. Finley is indicating to me one of the conditions of the holding is that the buildings located in the TM zone are to be designed and oriented to provide a public space and an entrance park type of condition. This would be subjected to the Urban Design Review Panel, Madam Chair, one way or another, so it's one of the considerations that we put right in the holding zone, and we'd be discussing with whoever the proponent is at the time.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions? Okay, so we'll... Questions for anybody? Oh, Steve, sorry, you're next. No, he is. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Or wrap up or whatever.
Just very quickly. I was reviewing the road design cross-section for Stage 2 LRT that talks about the reconstruction of the park and Richmond Road, and just looking at that cross-section, the width of the linear park right now is what? The Byron Linear Park. What is the width of Byron Linear Park?
Without knowing it offhand, Madam Chair, I'd say about 20 meters.
About 20 meters, yeah. The slides in this presentation show it as small as 10 meters in some spots, and then the cross-section, if you include the bike lane, gets up to about 20 meters. So we're talking about almost the same width as the Byron Linear Park between these two buildings, almost, relative. And the Byron Linear Park was this vaunted thing that needed to be protected during the whole Stage 2 debate. So if it's nice enough for the Byron Linear Park, why is it not nice enough to access the river corridor? I'm not sure. And it's rare that I agree with Councillor Nussbaum, but I do in this instance, in that once it gets past those two buildings, it broadens out. It broadens out to quite a wide area. So while I agree, I'm sympathetic to the idea that you need to have proper access, I think that can all be controlled through the site plan process and through the lifting of the holding provision.
Thank you. Councillor Huche?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your questions on and the answers we got on the holding provisions. Just a quick question. Maybe Mr. Mark is best to answer this. What is the impact on the 100-day agreement, Mr. Mark, about our decision here today, or when this item goes to Council?
Madam Chair, the commitment, as I understand it, is to bring this forward and to present it to Committee and Council. That has been done, and so in my opinion, the commitment that the City has made under the 100-day agreement has been fulfilled. One aspect that I didn't note that I think perhaps I should, and it's touched on in the report, the NCC does have its outstanding appeal to the official plan back from 2003 that is outstanding. And so the NCC does have the means to get this to the board under that appeal if they so wished.
So depending on what we decide, if the NCC, like any other proponent, can quickly access the appeal process?
They have an outstanding appeal, and so they could move forward on that as opposed to this amendment, Madam Chair.
Okay. The holding provision that would be lifted, it was confirmed that the lifting of the holding provision would come back to here. But we heard from the members of the community, one of the concerns is the proximity again to Fraser Avenue, and perhaps the building on the southwest corner could be moved to preserve that the privacy of the properties and the 6-story building adjacent to backyards. As part of lifting the holding provision, and Monsieur Migueles, you alluded to the NCC's process. Is any part of that process engaging with the community on further consultations on this?
Madam Chair, the NCC has indicated to us that before they do anything meaningful on this property, they will re-engage the public, and that gave us assurances that what we're doing here is simply putting the pieces in place for a very high-level framework, and then the more detailed discussions will follow. Certainly, that's the way we've packaged it.
But when we look at document, I'm not sure which document it is, part of the report, the document that shows Area B, Area A, it is pretty specific, as Councillor Leeper said. It does show that that corridor in the middle, 15-meter corridor in the middle, that as part of the zoning that we're being asked to approve today. It seems to me that it is rather specific zoning and not conducive to an easy change without coming back and starting this all over again.
It may well be that there are changes. I mean, as we heard earlier, there is never a single way to do things, and there's nothing preventing the NCC from widening that corridor or changing the location of the footprints of a building, and that would be through a process that comes back here in order to amend the schedule.
Conversely, could they narrow the corridor?
No, they could not.
Why?
It's the way that it's shown on the schedule. It is a minimum, so that 50 meters is a minimum, and that's in zoning.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cloutier. Hello. Any questions for Mr. Swale? Did you have something to say? I didn't see you in the audience, so I'm just surprised you looked up.
I was listening in the back. I just wanted to add a little bit of context with respect to some of the questions about why the NCC might need certainty at this time. With respect to the zoning, the NCC aren't asking and they don't need certainty at this time. What they do need some certainty around are their design plans for the park. Because the rest of the park, Stage 2 has been working closely with the NCC to take on about $6 or $7 million worth of scope towards early elements toward implementing that park itself. So without the certainty of which lands can be developed on this site at a future time, that leaves open a lack of certainty for the rest of that park space, which is being, as we said before, about 8% of it being left open for public enjoyment.
That's good to know. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Swale?
Mr. Swale, you're referring to this north part.
That's right. Yeah, north of those two parcels which abut onto the main street.
Area A.
Yes.
Area A. Okay.
Good.
And Madam Chair, I just want to clarify. I know Mr. Migley's indicated that the lifting of the holding would come back to me. The bylaw to lift the holding actually needs to be approved by council. The lifting of the holding under the delegation of authority bylaw actually can be done by staff unless the councillor, in this case, there's a good chance that we understand that councillor would be lifting delegated authority on the site plan, so we'd automatically bring the lifting of the holding forward as part of that site plan. But under normal conditions, if the conditions are satisfied for the lifting of an H, that H can be lifted under delegated authority by staff. But we anticipate in this instance that there's a very strong likelihood that, in fact, we would be coming forward. And further to Mr. McGlay's point, if there are adjustments that need to be made, those could be affected through a further adjustment to the zoning at that time. So I just want to clarify that, just so that there's a clear understanding on the part of this committee that under normal circumstances, lifting of holding would not normally come back to committee, but in this instance, there's an expectation that we would.
Good. Before I go back for a wrap-up to Councillor Leeper, everyone else has got questions Satisfied? Okay. Back to, for wrap-up to Councillor Leeper. Thank you. And thanks, Mr. Swell, wherever you went to, for coming out today.
Thanks, Chair. And I will keep it very brief. I think everything is on the table. And I do appreciate Mr. Swale's intervention there. The NCC does need certainty in relatively short order about where they will be allowed to build their park. The kind of specificity in terms of zoning where the corridor between buildings is not really specificity that the NCC, I think, needs today. Remember that when we started this process in 2015, it was a very simple, we're going to redesignate this as general urban,